Welcome back to the Balkan Buffet, where I serve up the history of the Balkans one plate at a time. Today's episode is a little different in that I'm discussing a topic that is currently an issue, but I will discuss the history behind the recent protests in Albania. I'm talking about something many people in the Balkans increasingly feel they're being served whether they ordered it or not. And what they're being served does sound like a nice luxury development, some foreign investments and promises of modernization, but there's a chance these dishes are rotted on the inside. In Albania, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets over a controversial luxury resort project linked to US President's son-in-law Jared Kushner and his daughter Ivanka Trump. Bulldozers have entered protected coastal areas while flamingos have become symbols of resistance. Protest signs reading "Albania is not for sale" and "We do not want Albania to become Dubai" have also spread across the country. But this story is about far more than one resort. To understand why this issue has struck such a nerve, we need to go back decades. Through the collapse of communism, the violent transition to capitalism, the rise of oligarchic networks, and one of the greatest financial disasters in modern European history. So grab a coffee or a snack and let's dig in. Our first course starts with a background behind the protests. Albanians have taken to the streets to protest a massive luxury tourism development linked to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. At the center of the controversy is a proposed multi-billion euro luxury resort development along Albania's Adriatic coast, including the protected Vjosa Lagoon and the former military island of Sazan. The Vjosa Lagoon is a wetland home to more than 200 migratory bird species, including flamingos. Additionally, other animals such as the Mediterranean monk seals and the nesting sea turtles can also be seen in the area. The Albanian government argues the project will transform the economy, attract elite tourism, and accelerate Albania's path into the European Union. Prime Minister Edi Rama has framed the investment as a symbol of modernization and economic growth. But for many Albanians, this is not a simple issue about tourism. I argue the protests are based on a deeper issue involving memory. Specifically, who owns the coastline? As a post-communist country, we should ask, has Albania truly escaped corruption and oligarchic politics? But Albania is not alone in their experience with corruption and oligarchic patterns. There is a deeper Balkan pattern in which governments promise modernization through foreign investment while citizens increasingly fear the public land and institutions and even national sovereignty are being sold to economic elites. To understand why these protests have become so emotionally charged, we have to go back decades. The memory of the collapse of communism, the violent transition to capitalism, and one of the greatest financial disasters in modern European history. Imagine a dinner at a Michelin restaurant and how beautiful the plating is. Now imagine the opposite of that, like the slop bowls you get at fill in your favorite restaurants. I love a good slop bowl, but it's not the prettiest thing. It's all mixed in and lacks the beauty of a carefully plated and organized dish or a full course meal. This is what the fall of communism in the early 90s looked like in the Balkans. The transition from communism to capitalism arrived all at once. For many Albanians, the first taste of capitalism came not through prosperity, but through chaos. That chaos would eventually explode into one of the most devastating financial collapses in post-Cold War Europe. For nearly half a century, Albania existed as one of the most isolated communist states in the world. Under Enver Hoxha's dictatorship, Private property was abolished, religion was suppressed, and the state controlled nearly every aspect of economic life. Albania remained isolated not only from the West, but eventually even from much of the communist bloc itself. When communism collapsed in the early 1990s, Albania entered capitalism almost overnight. But unlike Western Europe's transition to modern capitalism, Albania's transition did not occur through gradual institutional reform. Instead, it unfolded through economic shock, legal ambiguity, privatization, and institutional collapse. The state lacked strong democratic institutions. Furthermore, property ownership records were unclear, and this remains a key issue even today. Like other Balkan countries following the collapse of socialism or communism, former state assets were rapidly privatized. This allowed political elites and emerging businessmen a chance to gain enormous influence in the vacuum left behind by communism. This process was not unique to Albania. Across the former Yugoslavia and Eastern Europe, the transition from socialism to capitalism often produced oligarchic networks in which political power and economic wealth became deeply intertwined. But Albania's transition was particularly chaotic. The country had little experience with private banking, market economics, or financial regulation. Large portions of the population suddenly entered speculative financial schemes without institutional protections. The instability would culminate in the 1997 pyramid scheme collapse. The pyramid schemes collapsed nearly 30 years ago, but their legacy and the memory of them still hangs over Albanian society. Not only was the damage economic, but it created psychological damage to those affected by the pyramid schemes. Furthermore, trust in institutions was shattered. Once public trust is broken, every future promise of development becomes harder to swallow and is viewed with suspicion. The 1997 financial collapse remains one of the defining traumas in modern Albanian society. Throughout the mid-1990s, fraudulent investment schemes spread rapidly throughout the country. These pyramid schemes promised massive returns and attracted investment from ordinary Albanians desperate for economic opportunity after decades of poverty and isolation. An estimated 1 in 6 Albanians invested money into these schemes. Unfortunately, many people sold their homes, livestock, or family possessions. Some Albanians borrowed heavily while others invested remittances sent home by relatives working abroad. The Albanian government failed to intervene. In some cases, officials were accused of tolerating or indirectly legitimizing the schemes because the apparent economic boom created political stability and optimism. For example, the Jelica firm was created by 3 former state security operatives originating from Kukus, a city in North Albania. The company went bankrupt February 5, 1997, which prompted violent protests in the city of Florida, where the company's headquarters was located. Once the scheme started collapsing, hundreds of thousands of Albanians lost their savings almost overnight, and the state effectively disintegrated. The protests turned rebellious, and army depots were looted. The armed rebellion spread across the country, and an estimated 2,000 people unfortunately died in the violence that followed. For many Albanians, this period permanently and understandably destroyed trust in political institutions and in elite promises surrounding quote-unquote economic development. That historical trauma and the memory matters today when the modern governments promise transformational foreign investment projects. Many citizens do not automatically hear opportunity. They hear echoes of the 1990s. They hear promises made by elites while ordinary people like them absorb the risk. Here we get to one of the most controversial ingredients in the modern Balkan political recipe. What's the secret ingredient? Foreign direct investment, or FDI, and its use of strategic investment across the region. Some argue FDI and these deals are necessary to attract global capital and accelerate modernization. FDI can also act as another step to enter the European Union. But critics argue strategic investment by foreign firms can often function like pressure cookers for corruption. The Kushner-linked resort controversy also reflects a broader Balkan development strategy, which is based on strategic investment. Foreign investment has become a defining force in the Western Balkans developmental model. You can see new marinas, skylines, foreign-funded construction that creates momentum and visibility and symbols of belonging to the global economy. Under this framework, governments designate certain foreign investment projects as nationally important, as we can see in Albania's case and in Prime Minister Rama's various interviews. These projects often receive a lot of benefits from the government, such as fast-tracked permits, special legal exemptions, infrastructure support, long-term land leases, and unfortunately with this comes reduced public oversight. Anyways, supporters argue this is necessary to attract global capital to smaller economies. One example I can think of is the ArcelorMittal coke-making plant in Zenica, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Shout out to the 2024 documentary, The Sky Above Zenica. I'm sure the firm loved the lack of environmental regulations or much oversight by the government. But the locals took on the costs with higher than normal cancer rates and other health issues due to the pollutants being emitted. If ArcelorMittal could choose a location that required extra and more costly guardrails to protect the people and the environment, or a location without such protections, I'm going to put my money on it's going to choose the more lax location for its factory. And same goes with most FDI. They don't want a lot of guardrails, because with guardrails come extra costs. But the building boom from FDI also carries risk. Instead of strengthening democratic accountability and environmental protections, the enormous power tends to be concentrated in the executive branch and systems where administrative capacity is weak and political loyalty outweighs merit. Therefore, the race to attract capital can erode rather than strengthen institutions. The model has become increasingly common across the Balkans, especially in tourism, energy, and infrastructure development. According to a 2025 paper by Johnny et al., between 2020 and 2023, foreign direct investment, or FDI, steadily increased in the Western Balkans. Net inflows average roughly 6.4% of the recipient country's gross domestic product, or GDP, making this figure more than 4 times the EU average. Between 2015 and 2023, nearly 4/5 of the capital went to Serbia, Montenegro, and Albania, with the capital mainly going towards real estate and coastal infrastructure such as marinas and resorts. And this is where the controversy becomes regional rather than purely Albanian. Johnny et al. Focus on the concept of corrosive capital, which describes how investments not only exploit governance gaps in countries with weak or corrupt structures, but also makes those gaps even wider by drawing local elites into arrangements that prioritize visibility and rapid delivery over institutional resilience and long-term reform. EU systems constrain the discretion of investors, where Western Balkan countries enable the discretion and allow ambitious projects to advance with far fewer safeguards. Again, think about ArcelorMittal and Zenica. Basically, many Balkan citizens have watched similar projects repeatedly produce allegations of corruption, environmental destruction, debt dependency, and political favoritism. Albania is far from being the only Balkan country wrestling with this problem. Once you start looking around the region, a pattern emerges. From Serbian mega projects to Chinese-backed infrastructure, from Adriatic luxury developments to privatized coastlines in Montenegro, governments across the Balkans have increasingly embraced large-scale foreign investment as a shortcut to economic growth. But shortcuts can come with consequences. The Balkans have spent decades attempting to integrate into global capitalism while simultaneously struggling with weak institutions, political patronage systems, and post-socialist privatization. As a result, foreign investment projects often become politically explosive. One of the clearest examples can be seen in Serbia. In 2024 and 2025, Serbia faced major public outrage over infrastructure corruption after the collapse of a railway station canopy in Novi Sad, which unfortunately killed multiple people. The station reconstruction was tied to broader Chinese-backed infrastructure partnerships connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. And critics argued the disaster reflected a deeper structural problem. Specifically, the opaque contracting, the weakened oversight, political favoritism, rushed construction, and corruption within state infrastructure systems. As a result, mass protests erupted across Serbia. Demonstrators argue the government was sacrificing public safety in pursuit of politically connected mega projects and foreign investment deals. My Mudbrick video essay goes deeper into this issue if you're interested in further exploration. The tragedy became symbolic of a broader Balkan fear that governments increasingly prioritize elite development projects while weakening institutions meant to protect the ordinary citizens. Another Serbian controversy emerged around a planned luxury redevelopment project in Belgrade, linked again to Jared Kushner's investment network. Serbia's parliament passed special legislation allowing redevelopment of a former military complex bombed by NATO in 1999, which has been designated as a cultural heritage site. Soon afterwards, Serbian prosecutors charged several officials, including Nikola Selakovic, the cultural minister, with abuse of office and falsification of documents connected to the project approval process. Kushner later withdrew from the $500 million investment following the government minister's indictment and also due to the local protests and political turmoil that occurred. Again, the issue was not merely tourism. It was the perception that laws themselves were being rewritten to accommodate politically connected investors. Montenegro offers another example. For years, the country aggressively pursued luxury coastal tourism developments financed by foreign capital, particularly along the Adriatic coast. Critics accused political elites of enabling privatization of public coastal space, while ordinary citizens saw rising housing costs and limited local economic benefits. Across the former Yugoslavia, the pattern repeats. Public land transformed into elite tourism enclaves justified through promises of modernization and economic growth. The tragedy in Serbia transformed what might have been viewed as an isolated infrastructure failure into something larger. For many people, it became symbolic of a broader fear spreading throughout the region. The fear being that institutions are becoming weaker while politically connected mega projects become bigger. The public's ability to provide oversight and input into these projects is shrinking while private influence expands. Ordinary citizens are increasingly expected to absorb the risks while elites collect the rewards. A Western example of this is the expansion of AI data centers across the United States, where elites collect the rewards while the public bears the cost of things such as noise pollution, water pollution, and a decrease in home values. It seems that the public's voice has little influence into the decisions by these elites. In Albania, the conflict is intensified by the location itself. The Vjosa Narta Lagoon is one of Albania's most significant biodiversity areas and an important stopover for migratory birds along the Adriatic flyway, hence why the flamingo became a symbol in the protests. Environmental groups argued that luxury tourism infrastructure threatens fragile ecosystems that cannot easily be restored once damaged. But environmental protest in the Balkans is rarely only environmental. It becomes a proxy for larger anxieties about corruption, sovereignty, privatization, and democratic accountability. Many Albanians fear that elite tourism developments primarily benefit investors and politically connected networks rather than the local communities that I think it should be ultimately benefiting. Critics point to the previous cases in which beaches become effectively privatized, local residents lost access to coastal areas, and small guest house owners struggled to compete against large resort complexes. Supporters of the project argue the opposite. Prime Minister Edi Rama has defended the development as economically transformative, claiming luxury tourism creates jobs across the economy, from drivers and cooks to farmers and fishermen. But opponents question whether these benefits justify the long-term environmental and social costs. This reflects a larger global debate about development itself. Who really benefits from mega projects and who bears the risk and who gets excluded? And that brings us back to Albania's coastline. Environmental conflicts in the Balkans are rarely about nature only. They become stand-ins for larger questions. Who owns public land? Who gets access? Who profits from these investments? And who gets pushed aside in the name of development? One reason these debates remain so intense across the Balkans is because many post-communist societies never fully developed strong institutional separation between political and economic power. Instead, transitions to capitalism frequently produce oligarchic systems in which business elites depended on political access and politicians depended on investor networks. Privatization processes lacked transparency, and state contracts became tools of patronage, where, if you support a certain political party, then you get a contract. In this environment, public trust remains fragile. Citizens often assume that major investment projects involved hidden political relationships, even when direct evidence of criminal corruption is incomplete. Of course, this does not mean every foreign investment project is inherently corrupt. As long as the projects are transparent and done according to regulation and with the support of the locals, they can be economically beneficial. But it explains why many Balkan citizens react to these developments with suspicion rather than optimism. The historical memory of post-communist transition still shapes political culture today. This is ultimately why projects like the Kushner development trigger such intense reactions across the region. The debate isn't simply about hotels or tourism. It's about decades of unresolved tensions surrounding privatization, corruption, foreign influence, and public trust. The resort itself is only the latest course in a much larger Balkan political feast. And if you don't care about foreign influence on the environment within these Balkan countries, please go check out the documentary The Sky Above Zenica by directors Nana Frank Muller and Zlatko Pranch. The film depicts a grassroots struggle in Bosnia concerning the pollution created by the multinational company ArcelorMittal and the complicit institutions in Bosnia. It was very eye-opening for me and another great example of foreign influence negatively impacting local populations in the region. The protests in Albania are about far more than Jared Kushner. I believe they are largely about the unresolved legacy of post-communist transformation. These protests are a reflection of what happens when weak institutions meet global capital. The protests are also about environmental protection, public land, oligarchic politics, and economic inequality. They reveal a deeper Balkan tension that has existed for decades. There is this desire for modernization and integration into the global economy, but this desire runs alongside the fear that modernization is increasingly benefiting political and financial elites rather than the ordinary people. For governments across the region, mega projects symbolize progress. Luxury resorts are places in which the latest tech can be shown off, for example. But for many citizens, they symbolize dispossession. And until Balkan states resolve the deeper structural issues surrounding transparency, institutional trust, and political accountability, every new luxury resort, infrastructure corridor, or strategic investment project may continue to trigger the same questions and the same outcries from the public. Who is a development really for? What does it mean when a wealthy individual can just swim up to a piece of land and do with it as they wish with compliant local institutions? What happens next? Maybe the project moves forward, maybe legal investigations slow it down, maybe protests grow larger. Whatever happens on the Albanian coast, the controversy reveals something much deeper about the modern Balkans. The transition from communism to capitalism is an unfinished story. People are still debating who truly benefited from the transition and who is left paying the bill. With that, thank you for listening to the Balkan Buffet. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit like or subscribe and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, or leave a comment below and share this episode with someone else interested in Balkan history and politics. Vidimo se.